It was 2022 afternoon, a millionaire CEO with everything you could possibly want: money, power, and influence. But what happens when one thoughtless moment of cruelty changes everything? Meet David Harlow, a highly successful entrepreneur who seemed unstoppable. At the peak of his career, he made a decision that would ultimately unravel his entire life. It was supposed to be a simple stop at a local cafe, but what happened next would lead to a shocking downfall no one saw coming. David, known for his sharp business sense and aggressive drive, walked into a small restaurant one evening, completely unaware that a simple interaction with a waitress would set off a chain of events that would ruin everything he had worked for. The waitress, Emma, had no idea who he was when he sat down. She greeted him like any other customer, but what followed was something she would never forget. David, in a moment of frustration, lashed out at her over a minor mistake, something that might have been overlooked by anyone else. But David wasn't just anyone. His words were harsh, cutting, and humiliating. He didn't just complain. He made her feel small, unworthy, and insignificant. Little did he know that this moment would be the spark that ignited a fire he couldn't control. The incident went viral. What started as a minor altercation turned into a media storm, with news outlets, social media, and thousands of people demanding justice for Emma. As the backlash grew, so did the pressure on David. His once pristine reputation as a savvy businessman crumbled. Sponsors pulled out, investors backed away, and the company that he had built from the ground up began to show signs of collapse. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, and every attempt David made to salvage his image only seemed to make things worse. But the story doesn't end there. As David's world started to fall apart, something darker began to unfold, something that no one could have predicted. The consequences of his actions went beyond a ruined career. The emotional toll of the scandal led him down a path of isolation, regret, and despair. And just when he thought things couldn't get worse, a mysterious figure from his past resurfaced, threatening to expose secrets that David had desperately tried to bury. As the pressure mounted, David found himself questioning everything. Was the wealth and success worth it if he had lost his integrity, his dignity, and his soul in the process? And just how far would he go to stop the storm that was now crashing over him? Tune in as we dive deeper into the aftermath of David Harlow's fall from grace, a story of redemption, vengeance, and the price of arrogance. What happens when a millionaire CEO loses everything? You won't believe the dark turn his life took after that one fateful encounter. David Harlow wasn't always the man the media portrayed after the incident. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. In fact, his rise to the top was the result of years of grinding, sacrifices, and a relentless pursuit of success. Raised in a modest household, David had learned early on that nothing came easy. His father, a struggling mechanic, had always told him, "If you want something, you work for it. No one hands you anything in this world." Those words had stuck with David through every challenge, pushing him to take bold risks that eventually led him to build one of the most successful tech startups of the decade. His company had skyrocketed, attracting investors, executives, and clients from around the world. David was known for his sharp instincts, his no-nonsense attitude, and his ability to make decisions that others might shy away from. He had it all: luxury cars, private jets, a sprawling mansion. But despite the outward success, something always felt off. He had worked so hard to get here, but in the back of his mind, a constant pressure gnawed at him. Was it all worth it? Was he becoming the man his younger self had feared? The day he walked into that cafe, he didn't see a waitress. He saw an inconvenience. The minor mistake she made, a miscommunication about his order, was enough to set him off. His anger, which had always been buried beneath layers of ambition and control, bubbled to the surface. He snapped, berating her in front of the entire restaurant. He didn't care who saw or heard. He was untouchable, wasn't he? No one could challenge him. But in that moment, something shifted. The woman he had humiliated wasn't just any ordinary waitress. She was someone with a community of people who cared about her. Someone with a voice, and her voice was louder than David could have ever anticipated. Emma, the waitress, was just trying to make a living. She wasn't trying to ruin anyone's day, let alone confront a millionaire CEO. But as the hours passed after the incident, Emma found herself becoming the face of something bigger. People rallied behind her, sharing her story online, calling out the arrogance and entitlement that David had shown. What started as an isolated incident turned into a national conversation about respect, power, and accountability. The hashtag Justice for Emma started trending, and every day more people joined in, demanding David's apology. At first, David tried to downplay it. He issued a statement apologizing, claiming it was a moment of frustration. But the apology fell flat. The media wasn't interested in his justification. They wanted drama. They wanted to see him fall. And fall he did. Sponsors began to pull out from his business, investors grew hesitant, and employees started to question their loyalty to a man who had once been admired but now was seen as a symbol of corporate greed and arrogance. As the pressure mounted, David started to feel the walls closing in. Late-night calls, media scrutiny, and endless public backlash were taking their toll. But the worst was yet to come. A former associate from David's past, someone he had wronged years ago, suddenly resurfaced. This person held secrets that could destroy him, secrets that, if revealed, could erase everything David had built. But who was this mysterious figure, and what did they want? One thing was certain: David had more enemies than he realized, and they were closing in. David's life had become a constant battle, one he was starting to feel he couldn't win. As the backlash from the cafe incident continued to escalate, he tried to focus on keeping his company afloat. But each decision he made felt like it came with a price. Clients pulled out, and employees who had once admired him began to question their loyalty. The confident, self-assured CEO was no longer in control. The weight of his past decisions, especially the mistreatment of Emma, weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning. Meanwhile, Emma found herself in a whirlwind of her own. The support she had gained was overwhelming. Messages flooded her inbox, people offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Some even started digging into David's past, unearthing stories of how he had mistreated other employees and colleagues. As much as Emma appreciated the support, she couldn't help but feel conflicted. She hadn't wanted this level of attention. She just wanted a simple apology, a sign that David had learned something from his actions. But the media wasn't interested in a quiet resolution. They wanted the spectacle, the drama. And as the days passed, Emma began to wonder if she had become part of something much bigger than she'd ever intended. But it wasn't just the public pressure that was closing in on David. The person from his past, the one who had resurfaced, was a name David had hoped would stay buried: Rachel Vaughn. She was an old business partner, someone he'd once trusted but had betrayed years ago over a deal that had gone south. David had left her to take the fall for a failed project, and Rachel had vanished from his life. Or so he thought. Now, Rachel was making moves, hinting at information that could not only destroy David's reputation, but also expose shady dealings that had long been kept hidden. David knew Rachel wasn't someone to be taken lightly. She had always been calculating, methodical, and dangerous. If she had her hands on something that could ruin him, he needed to act fast. But how far would he go to silence her? Would he resort to more of the ruthless tactics that had once made him successful? Or was he finally being forced to face the consequences of his past actions? As the storm around him intensified, David was left to confront a question he never thought he'd ask. Was it too late for redemption? The pressure on David was mounting in ways he couldn't ignore anymore. Every time he opened his phone, another headline flashed across his screen, mocking his fall from grace. The once untouchable CEO had become a symbol of everything people despised: arrogance, entitlement, and greed. Even his most loyal employees were starting to speak out, some anonymously, others publicly. The whispers behind his back grew louder, and it felt like his entire empire was crumbling piece by piece. But it wasn't just the public backlash that kept him up at night. The looming threat of Rachel hung over him like a dark cloud. He had tried to reach out to her, to make peace, but each message went unanswered. Her silence only fueled his paranoia. What did she know? What was she planning? He knew Rachel had a knack for exposing the darkest parts of people, and if she had something on him, it could all be over. Meanwhile, Emma, though trying to keep a low profile, was beginning to feel the weight of the situation herself. The media attention, the constant spotlight. It was all too much. She hadn't asked for this. She just wanted the apology, the acknowledgement that she hadn't deserved to be treated the way she was. The phone call came at midnight. David had been expecting it, but the shock of hearing Rachel's voice on the other end of the line still made his heart race. "You've been running from this for too long, David," she said, her tone cold and calculated. "It's time to pay for your sins." David's blood ran cold. He had no idea how far Rachel was willing to go, or what she was prepared to expose next. What did she want? What was she holding over him? The uncertainty gnawed at him as he paced around his office, knowing that this was the moment everything could come crashing down. David's hand tightened around his phone, the grip so hard his knuckles turned white. Rachel's voice on the other end was calm, but her words sent a shiver down his spine. "You've been running from this for too long, David. It's time to pay for your sins." But before he could respond, she hung up, leaving him in an eerie silence that felt louder than any shouting match. David stared at the phone, his mind racing. Was she really going to expose him? What could she have possibly found after all these years? But then, just as the panic began to set in, his phone buzzed again. An email. He clicked it open, expecting the worst, but what he saw made his heart skip a beat. It was from Emma. She'd sent him a detailed list of all the things he'd done wrong in the past. Business deals gone bad, people he had thrown under the bus, employees he had mistreated. But it wasn't just a list. Emma had uncovered even more damning information, specific transactions, confidential documents, and meetings that had been hidden from public view. At first, David thought it was a mistake. How could she have gotten access to this? Was she working with Rachel? But as he read on, his stomach dropped. The documents were real. They were things he thought were buried for good. The shock of it all hit him like a freight train. Emma wasn't just asking for an apology anymore. She had plans of her own. She had leverage, more leverage than anyone had ever had over him. David realized that her humble request had shifted into something far more dangerous. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a force, one who was now playing a game he didn't know the rules of. The walls were closing in. Rachel, with her quiet threats, and now Emma, who seemed to have access to everything that could bring David to his knees. He could feel his empire slipping away with every passing minute. But the biggest twist was still to come. As he frantically tried to call Emma to plead for answers, another email came in. This one wasn't from her, though. It was from someone else entirely, a name he didn't recognize, but the subject line was simple: "I know everything, and I'm not done yet." David sat back in his chair, his thoughts scattered. Who else was involved? What was going on behind the scenes? Was there someone else pulling strings, orchestrating this entire downfall? With each passing moment, the tension built to a fever pitch. It was no longer just about saving his reputation or his company. It was about survival. And in this game, he didn't know who his allies were, or if he even had any left. David's mind was reeling as he read that final email. The name at the bottom, Mia Walker, meant nothing to him, but the chilling message did. "I know everything, and I'm not done yet." His heart pounded in his chest as the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. Mia wasn't just some random person trying to take him down. She was connected to Rachel. They were working together. The realization hit him hard. It wasn't just about his fall from grace. Someone was orchestrating his destruction, and they were far more skilled than he'd anticipated. Desperate, David did the only thing he could think of. He reached out to Rachel. The phone call went straight to voicemail, but he left a frantic message. "Rachel, I know you're behind this. Please, we can fix this. I'll do anything." The desperation in his voice surprised even him. He had always prided himself on control, but now it seemed like control had slipped from his fingers completely. Minutes felt like hours as he waited for a response, but nothing came. His thoughts spun as he tried to figure out who Mia was, why she had decided to join forces with Rachel, and what they wanted from him. He paced around his office, feeling the walls closing in. The pressure had never been this intense. Then, just as he was about to give up hope, a message popped up on his screen. It was from Emma. "I'm not done either, David." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. But this wasn't an empty threat. Emma's email included something he never expected. A live video link. He hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. When he clicked the link, the screen flashed to life, revealing a figure he recognized all too well. It was Mia Walker, standing in front of a large table stacked with papers, documents, and files. She smiled at the camera, her expression cold. "We've been waiting for you, David," Mia said calmly, her voice sending a chill down his spine. "It's time for everything to come to light." David felt the ground beneath him start to shift. The truth he had buried for years, the lies and manipulation, it was all being laid bare for the world to see. But just as his mind raced to figure out how to stop this, Mia's face shifted into a knowing smirk. "But here's the twist, David. I'm not the one pulling the strings." David's breath caught. "What do you mean?" he managed to whisper, panic creeping into his voice. Mia's smile widened. "Look closely at who's really behind all this. It's someone you never saw coming." The screen flickered, and David's jaw dropped as a new face appeared. It was his own brother, Ben Harlow. David's mind went blank. Ben had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed out of the spotlight. But now, here he was, a puppet master, orchestrating the entire downfall of David's life. Surprised? Ben's voice was calm, almost pitying. "I knew you'd get too cocky, thought you were invincible, but now, it's my turn." David felt his world shatter in that instant. Everything he thought he knew about his family, about his life, had been a lie. Ben had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, as the truth began to unravel, David understood the full scope of his betrayal. The empire he had built, the career he had fought for, was nothing more than a house of cards. But the worst part? David realized he might not be able to escape the storm this time. Not from his brother, not from Rachel, and not from Emma, who had now become more than just a victim. She had become part of the plan. David's world had fallen apart in the span of minutes. The shock of seeing his own brother, Ben, standing at the center of his downfall left him reeling. His empire, his reputation, everything he had built, had been torn down by the one person he least expected. As Ben's face remained frozen on the screen, David's mind raced. How had it come to this? All those years, he had assumed Ben was content in the background, living a quiet life. But Ben had been patient, waiting, observing, and plotting. David had been too caught up in his own rise to notice the resentment brewing just beneath the surface. Ben's voice continued to echo in David's mind, the words searing through him. "You were always the star, David, the one everyone praised. But who cared about the sacrifices I made? Who cared about my work behind the scenes? You stole everything. And now it's time for me to take it all back." The betrayal stung in ways David couldn't even begin to process. His brother had been his closest ally, the person who should have been by his side. But now, Ben had manipulated everything, using Rachel and Mia as pawns to destroy him. And Emma, the waitress who had started all this, she had played a role too, but not the way David had originally thought. She wasn't just a victim. She had become a part of the plan, unknowingly helping to bring down the very person who had humiliated her. The finality of it all hit him hard. David had lost. The public fallout was inevitable. News outlets had already picked up the video of Ben's revelation, and the media frenzy was already in full swing. The social media hashtags David Harlow exposed and family betrayal were trending as more people turned against him. His company was done, his investors gone, and the trust he once commanded shattered. But amidst the ruin, David knew one thing. He had been given an unexpected opportunity, an opportunity to rebuild. But not as the arrogant CEO who once thought he was invincible. The damage was done, and while the road ahead would be long and painful, it was one he would have to walk alone. Ben had taken everything, but in the process, David had lost more than just his wealth and status. He had lost himself. And maybe, just maybe, this was the wake-up call he needed to truly change. He didn't know what the future held. But as the last of his empire crumbled, David understood that the real question wasn't about what he had lost. It was about who he would become. In the end, the greatest lesson wasn't about power, money, or revenge. It was about humility, accountability, and the true cost of arrogance. David now had to face the consequences of his actions, both personal and professional. The journey toward redemption, if it ever came, would be a slow one. But at least now, he knew where he had to start, by owning the truth. and that, in itself, was a step toward the person he might someday become.